Hello. Hello. Kelly here with Kelly's Broken Life. And I'm here, even though it is actually the 1st of October, with the herb and plant that I worked with in September. And the plant that I worked with, the herb spirit that I worked with this month is tobacco. And this this plant came to me early on in the year. It says something that I wanted to work with. And I kind of put it off because I wasn't quite sure how I wanted to work with it, if I wanted to work with it. But one of the points of the 4 things that I'm doing every month this year is to go deeper with things and to really explore in different ways and in new ways. And using tobacco and working with tobacco, it has been a very eye-opening experience. It has really helped me go deeper in a lot of ways and has helped me to have an open mind, see things in new ways, and also but then I really haven't, and there's some in some ways I have don't have any more answers, and I have a lot more questions or a lot more things that I want to do, and a lot more ways that I want to work with this plant, this spirit. And so it was in the research that I did and the places that I was very careful to get information because I wanted to make sure that I was I was able to relate the things that I have learned to you in a way that is respectful, in a way that is understanding, in a way that doesn't, in a way that I'm not appropriating anything, in a way that I'm not making assumptions and making and talking about things in a way that I didn't really know anything about. So I made sure that I really did research and that I was careful about the places that I went for research and the places that I went for information so that I had an understanding of tobacco and an understanding just beyond my own story with it. And I can kind of start there with my own story with tobacco and the way that I was raised and the things the things that I kind of brought along with me to this point, and how that I always knew that there was more to this story, that there was more to the history, and that tobacco could be, a great teacher and a as well as a guide and a way to go deeper. And that's definitely the way that I've been wanting to work with the items that I've been choosing to work with every month. And so every month, every moon cycle, I started out with the moon cycles, but every month now I'm working with an herb, a book, a deck, and a crystal. And so in September, I worked with hematite, tobacco, and I am working with the Boadicea tarot, and I'll have a deck review for that coming up shortly. And I've been reading the book, The Goddess and the Shaman, and I'm only about halfway done with it. So it's going to have to go over into October. So that one, I'll have a book review for you in October. So I kind of shifted things there. But again, tobacco is something that I wanted to work with and I wanted to go deeper with, to really do some exploration, to really find out the history, to really start making myself more knowledgeable about the past. And because it is part of my story, about a part of my history and part of and a way that affects me now. And I feel like that is something that I need to do some healing work with, and definitely doing some self exploration and some ways to find out how I can honor the past and honor tobacco as an herb and as a plant spirit and a teacher and a healer, and how I can be and honor that and use it in my story going forward. I hope in a good way, in a respectful way. So I really am looking to do that. And so my story with tobacco is that both sides of my family, my mother's side and my father's side, both grew up in very rural areas and were farmers, were worked on the land, and were not at all rich people. And even my great grandparents, my grandparents, my great grandparents on both of those sides had very similar histories and similar stories. And most of my ancestors going back, generations, have lived here for since settlers and colonists started coming over here. And so and there's lots of stories about them and why they came here and different reasons they came here. But the bottom line is that most of my ancestors are from England and Ireland. I have some from Germany, and they did come here, and they came here in the very, very early days of of European settlers coming here and settling here. And so it is something that I have had to that I'm working on and that I'm working on. And I feel like that it's part of my journey and part of the healing that is that I need to do as well. And being, finding out more about my history and about my story, and being able to see things that I may need to do, and and things that I can be a part of at this point in my life where I am now, and after generations of being here. And so the kind of the mirror ancestors and my family, my parents, my grandparents, my great grandparents, I pretty much know most of their stories. And my great grandfather, I even knew. He lived in his almost to 100, and so I did know him growing up. And so, and knowing their stories and knowing how they worked the land, they all had gardens, they all had chickens and outhouses and things like that, wells in their front yard. And so, knowing that they came from this land, and knowing that I don't know that any of my immediate family on those sides had specifically had tobacco farms. I'm sure that they had neighbors, and because I remember, my grandparents on both sides having neighbors, and in the places they lived, having neighbors and friends that did grow tobacco, and that was their livelihood. And they all, even my parents, grew up around tobacco farms and around farms in these rural areas. And that was one of the things that they did in the summer. And they went and helped their friends and neighbors to make money, and to pick the tobacco in the summer for it to be cured and sold to the tobacco, and, to the cigarette manufacturers around here. And I also had, and two of the biggest cigarette manufacturers are in North Carolina, and I had family members that worked there. And it was, it was, I think it was just one of those things that you just kind of grew up around, and you grew up with, and you just didn't question it. And it wasn't until later on, probably when I was maybe in high school or college, that the cigarette manufacturers were starting to be doubted, and they were starting to be sued, and they were starting to have warning labels put on cigarette packages, and the advertisement for cigarettes went away, and you couldn't advertise anymore. And so but it was, kind of that double-edged sword, that it was a way that people were making money, keeping their families alive, but yet they were doing it to the detriment of other people, and they were doing it at the cost of other people's lives. And that was a really hard thing, and I think something that I always struggled with, just knowing, having this little bit of information, and having this little bit of information, and this contact with the with tobacco, and farms and farming, and cigarettes, and things like that. And so it was, I had a lot of relatives that smoked, and that, and friends, and even in high school, I had friends that used chewing tobacco, and things like that, even though, by that time we pretty much knew that smoking was not good for you, and using tobacco was not good for you. And so, but it became an addiction. It became something that is really hard to quit. And I remember my dad, and my mom never smoked, but my dad did. And when before I was born, he was a smoker, and he um and told me, when I guess when I got older, that when I was very young, and I guess first starting to walk, that he smoked in the house, and had an ashtray, and put his cigarette butts in the ashtray. And I guess when I was very young, starting to walk, I went over to the ashtray and picked up a cigarette butt and put it in my mouth, because I'd probably seen so many people in my family smoking, and didn't really know anything about it. And he said that day he threw out all the cigarettes and quit. However, it was one of the hardest things that he ever did. And he says, to this day, and that was, 50 something years ago. And he says, to this day, that is one of the hardest things that he ever did, was try to quit smoking, because he knew that he wanted to do it for me and my sister who was coming along. And so, and, I think he knew deep down that it was not good for him either. So, but it was very hard, because it is an addiction, something that we have turned into an addiction. We've turned into something that we've just exploited, and and we've, used people, and used um, children, getting them hooked on tobacco and cigarettes, and making it cool, because movie stars and things smoked. And so, making, just like the Marlboro Man, and the cigarette commercials. And I remember that when I was really young, it was still on TV. It was cool. And so, and it's, came down to the dollar. It came down to making money versus, taking care of people. And I think even today, we're faced with that in so many ways. We're faced with companies making more and more and more money, and not really caring about their product anymore, not really caring that they're causing diabetes and cancer, and whatever it is, and early deaths, and childhood obesity, and things like that it comes down to making more money. And it's really, it's very sad that it has come to that. And that, I think, that if anything that I've got out of what I have done, is that tobacco, the sacred tobacco that has been used by Native Americans, and that was used by Native Americans, is of course not the same as the commercial tobacco that is grown here. But the tobacco, but it's still, it's still related, and it's still the same related to the same plant. And it was once the most, or one of the most sacred plants, and the most sacred healers, and the most sacred guides. And in the history of the Native Americans. But now it has become one of the most exploited plants on earth, and especially here in the United States, where we are. And other places, I'm sure as well, because it becomes, it's become a commodity. It's become a product. It's become something that is okay to manipulate and to turn into something that instead of a teacher, that it is the opposite. It is not a healer, and it should be respected, and it should be something that is respected. And it was just it was very hard for me to see how other people that claimed to be Christian and claimed to be authorities, claim to be working for God, to make these practices and make the ways that other people lived and other people related to the earth and other people had their own religion and had their own spiritual practices and had their own ways of healing, and to make it into something that was bad, to make it into something that was illegal, something that you could go to jail for, something that was taken away. And as a person who is complicit in that, I mean, I no doubt have had relatives were that took land away, and that now live on land that belonged to Native Americans, that grew crops in places that that they shouldn't be grown, did those kinds of things. And so, as someone who is that and grew up in the church and looked down on pagan practices, you know, I even though I at the time doubted, had serious doubts about a God that could be so cruel. How could God say that these practices were wrong? Any other practice that was, and that's what I was taught when I grew up, that any other practice besides Christianity, even Catholicism, because I grew up in the Protestant church, was bad or wrong. And I just, that it was, something that's very hard. And that's definitely why I'm sitting here today, working with tobacco and, working with these questions and these things that are, very hard that I've been a part of. And, it's very, it's very disturbing, to me. And I'm at the place where I feel like that, going deeper, and I want, tobacco to be a teacher for me and to be something that can teach me as well and guide me, and hopefully let me be an agent of change and let me be an agent of working with this plant and this, and the spirit of this plant and the spirit of this healer and guide, that I can do something now to help in that healing process. And so, it was definitely it was definitely hard, and it was, and to know that I was, and my family has been part of that, is just, is heartbreaking. And to think what pain is still being caused by people today, and what, pain is still being caused by an unacceptance and exclusion and things to Native Americans, to all people of color, to all of them. And it's just, it's one of those questions. And I just think, why is it, what is it that makes people be so cruel, and to think that their only religion is the only one, and everything else is bad or outlawed. And so, and I don't know that I'm ever going to find out the answer. I don't know that there'll ever be an answer. But hoping with my practice and the things that I'm doing now that I can do these things and learn to be part of a community that does that is better and that is more accepting and less judgmental and more open-minded and open-hearted and less looking at the dollar and looking uh, at ways to share energy and to share resources and to know that it's not going to run out and there's and but we are damaging the earth and we are and the things that I can do as myself to help that healing, to help the healing and to help to heal the earth and to help heal the the traumas that have occurred over the centuries. And so it's definitely has been a teacher for me, and it's definitely something that I'm going to be working with more and going even deeper with. And so and I have put down what I have found out and what I have learned about tobacco in the Book of Shadow sheet that I have for everything that I've done up to this point. And so I've put some things on here and put some things things that I've learned, things that I've learned about the Native American practices and things that I thought were important that I could, squeeze into one sheet because of course, it's things that that we could go on and on and on and on and on about. Um, but I just wanted to put some of the things that I learned from it, and so that you can kind of have it as a guide. And if this something is something that calls to you, then you can definitely go deeper with it as well. But I just felt like this was something that I needed to do for myself, and now I can use this and the things that I've learned and the things that I have different experiences that I've had just in this last month, and I feel like that it's grown out of a lot of practices that I've been doing up until this point. So I have some things on the PDF for you about tobacco, and it is the sacred tobacco and how it was used in Native American cultures, in Native American rituals, and in history. And I've seen very many a lot of videos and a lot of websites and things about bringing this back, about bringing back the use of sacred tobacco in and the way that it was used in history and it was and how it was intended to be used. And so I think, and also how that there are lots of movements of getting of teaching people about commercial tobacco and the dangers. And so that may be a way that I can give back and to support some of those things and to support some of those local programs of smoking cessation programs and educational programs that show that it's that commercial tobacco, the dangers of it and how it's not how it's not a good thing and how it can be. And there are support groups and there are ways to support that, and so that this cycle of of this exploitive way of using tobacco, is hopefully, hopefully one day comes to an end, and we realize that it's not good for us, and that we realize that it's not, and other people realize that pushing these products and pushing the and just relying on it to be a money making some way a way to make money, that we can go past that. And so that that was something that I learned a lot about and learned a lot about different ways to do that, and these programs that are in place, and hopefully that's something that I can support. So that is it for today. And I have just an offering prayer to tobacco that I just want to bring in the spirit of tobacco that I have been working and that's been teaching me this month. And I have a prayer. Sacred tobacco, great healer and teacher, accept this love and peace I offer. So may it be. So again, all the resource that you need, all the things that I've been talking about this past month are there'll be links below. And in the next couple of days, I'll have the deck that I've been working with and have it out, and you can see it. And I'll do a deck review for it, and then I'll go into the items for October, which I'm really looking forward to. So again, thank you for listening to me, and thank you for going on this journey with me with tobacco. And I hope that I've inspired you, and that I've brought the healing and the guiding spirit of tobacco into your life as well as it has been with me during this last month. So have a good day, and I will see you again soon. Bye.